Keanu Reeves had always valued his privacy. Despite his global fame, he preferred quiet moments, riding the subway, grabbing a coffee from a small shop, or walking the streets like any regular person. That's exactly what he was doing on a cool Wednesday afternoon in Los Angeles when he stopped by a modest, family-owned grocery store on the outskirts of the city. Dressed simply in jeans, a black jacket, and his signature beanie, Keanu blended in. He walked through the aisles slowly, picking up essentials, some fruit, a loaf of bread, a carton of milk. He wasn't in a rush. He never was. At the front of the store, a middle-aged woman stood at the checkout counter, nervously counting a handful of crumpled bills and loose coins. Her face was lined with exhaustion, and her hands trembled slightly as she tried to do the math. The cashier, a young man barely out of high school, shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, you're about $5 short," he said gently. "Would you like me to put something back?" The woman exhaled slowly, biting her lip as she looked over her small pile of groceries. A pack of rice, some canned vegetables, a gallon of milk, and a single carton of eggs. Nothing extravagant. Nothing that should feel like a luxury. And yet, here she was, forced to choose what she could afford to keep. Keanu, who had been waiting in line behind her, watched quietly. He noticed the slight hesitation in her hands, the way her shoulders hunched forward, as if bracing herself for the embarrassment of having to put food back. Without a second thought, he stepped forward. "Excuse me," Keanu said softly. "Let me get that for you." The woman turned, startled. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight of the man beside her. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't quite place it. "Oh no," she said quickly, shaking her head. "That's very kind, but I can't." "It's okay," Keanu interrupted with a small, warm smile. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a crisp $50 bill. "Please. It's just groceries. Let me help." The cashier's eyes flickered with recognition, but he didn't say anything. He simply took the bill and rang up the rest of the woman's items. The woman hesitated for a moment longer, her pride warring with her gratitude. But as she looked into Keanu's kind eyes, she saw no pity, only genuine generosity. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say. Just pay it forward when you can," Keanu replied with a gentle nod. The woman clutched her bags tightly, still overwhelmed. But just before she turned to leave, something changed in her expression. She squinted at Keanu, her eyes searching his face. "Wait, do I know you?" she asked, tilting her head. Keanu chuckled softly. "I don't think so." She studied him for another second, and then her face paled slightly. You look just like him." Keanu smiled, amused. "Like who?" She swallowed, suddenly unsure. "Keanu Reeves." Keanu gave a small, knowing grin. "Yeah, I get that a lot." The woman let out a shaky laugh, but something in her eyes remained uncertain. As if a memory was tugging at the edge of her mind, something she couldn't quite grasp. She opened her mouth as if to say something more, but then hesitated. Instead, she just shook her head and smiled. "Well, whoever you are, thank you." Keanu nodded again, watching as she turned and walked out of the store. He had no idea that his small act of kindness had just reopened a door to a past he had long forgotten. And that woman? She was about to change everything he thought he knew about his own life. Keanu paid for his groceries and walked out of the small store, slipping his hands into the pockets of his jacket as the cool afternoon breeze rustled through the streets. He wasn't thinking much about what had just happened. Helping people was second nature to him, something he did without expectation. But something about that woman lingered in his mind. The way she had looked at him. The flicker of hesitation in her eyes. As if she had recognized him, not just as a famous actor, but in a much deeper way. Keanu shook the thought away. "You're imagining things," he told himself. He had just reached his motorcycle, an old but reliable Norton Commando, when he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me, sir?" He turned. It was the woman from the store, standing a few feet away, clutching her grocery bags tightly. Her face was tense, as if she was wrestling with a decision. "Hey," Keanu said, offering the same warm smile. "Everything okay?" She nodded quickly, but there was something in her expression, uncertainty, nervousness. I don't mean to bother you," she started. "But I have to ask, are you really Keanu Reeves?" Keanu let out a small chuckle. He was used to being recognized, but there was something different about the way she asked. "Yeah," he admitted with a slight shrug. "That's me." The woman exhaled, her grip on her grocery bags tightening. "Oh my God," she whispered, almost to herself. Keanu furrowed his brow. "Are you okay?" She hesitated. I don't know. This is going to sound crazy, but I think I knew your mother." Keanu's easy smile faltered. He hadn't expected that. "My mother?" he repeated, his voice quieter now. The woman nodded quickly. "Yes. Years ago. In Toronto." The mention of Toronto, the city where Keanu had spent much of his childhood, made his chest tighten. Keanu took a step closer, studying the woman's face. Now that he looked more carefully, something about her did seem vaguely familiar. "What was your name again?" he asked. "Lena," she said. "Lena Carter." Keanu searched his memories, but the name didn't immediately spark anything. "And you knew my mom, Patricia?" Lena nodded. "Not well, but yes. I used to work at a little diner she went to all the time. She was always so kind to me. And you used to come with her sometimes. You were just a little kid back then." Keanu's mind raced. His mother had raised him and his sister mostly on her own, moving from place to place, working hard to provide for them. He remembered spending a lot of time in small diners and cafes while she worked or met with friends. And now, standing before him, was a woman who had been there. Lena let out a shaky breath. "I know this is so random, but when I saw you just now, when I really looked at you, it all just hit me. I remembered your face. You were always such a quiet kid, but your mom used to say you had the kindest heart." Keanu swallowed hard, unexpected emotion creeping up his throat. "She was an amazing woman," he said softly. Lena nodded. "She really was." For a moment, they stood in silence, two strangers unexpectedly connected by a distant past. Then Lena bit her lip, as if debating whether to say something else. "There's one more thing," she said hesitantly. "Something I never told anyone. I don't know if I should even bring it up now, but..." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Lena took a deep breath. "I think I might know something about your father." Keanu's heart stopped. His father. The man who had disappeared from his life when he was just a child. The man he had barely spoken about in years. "Lena," he said carefully, his voice calm but firm. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, shifting on her feet. "I mean, I think I might have met him once." Keanu stared at her, his mind reeling. He had spent his entire life moving forward, never looking back at the man who had left them. But now, standing in a quiet parking lot outside a grocery store, a woman from his past was telling him she might know something that could change everything. And for the first time in a long time, Keanu wasn't sure if he wanted to hear the answer. Keanu's pulse quickened, but his face remained calm. Years of practice, years of learning how to manage the unexpected, how to carry grief without letting it show, had prepared him for moments like this. But this was different. For most of his life, Keanu had accepted that his father was gone. He had stopped looking, stopped wondering. It was easier that way. And yet, here was Lena, standing in front of him, saying she might have met the man who had walked away all those years ago. "Lena," Keanu said slowly, carefully choosing his words, "when did you meet him?" She hesitated, tightening her grip on her grocery bags as if the weight of her own memories had suddenly become heavier. "It was a long time ago," she admitted. "More than 30 years. Back when I was still working at the diner in Toronto." Keanu listened intently. "One night, your mother came in late. She looked tired, like she'd had a long day. She sat at the counter like she always did, ordered her usual coffee. And then, maybe 10 minutes later, he walked in. Keanu's breath hitched. "You knew it was him?" he asked. Lena nodded. She called him Samuel. Keanu's chest tightened. Samuel Nowlin Reeves Jr., his father's name. It was real. He wasn't in good shape. Lena continued. "I remember because it felt off. Your mother was always so put together, so strong. But when she saw him, she just froze." Keanu swallowed hard. He could picture it. The mother he had loved so deeply, the woman who had raised him, suddenly confronted by the man who had abandoned her. Lena's voice softened. They talked for a while. Not loudly, but you could tell there was history there, unfinished business. Keanu clenched his jaw. Of course, there was unfinished business. His father had left when Keanu was only 3 years old, drifting in and out of legal trouble, eventually disappearing from their lives completely. "I remember one thing very clearly," Lena said. "Your mom kept saying, 'He doesn't need you. He's better off without you.'" Keanu inhaled sharply. "She meant me," he murmured. Lena nodded. "I think so." Keanu's mind spun. His mother had always been fiercely protective of him and his sister, Kim. She had never spoken much about his father, never filled in the gaps, never encouraged him to ask questions. And he had never pushed. But now, for the first time in years, he found himself wondering. "Did he say anything?" Keanu asked. "Anything about me?" Lena hesitated. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That's the part one never forgot." Keanu's hands curled into fists. Lena looked at him, her eyes full of something he couldn't quite place, pity, maybe. Or regret. He said, "I know I messed up. But I think about him every day." Keanu felt like the air had been knocked from his lungs. He had spent his whole life believing his father had walked away without a second thought. That he had left them behind without looking back. And now, after all this time, he was hearing something different. "He asked if he could see you," Lena continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But your mom, she wouldn't let him." Keanu swallowed the lump in his throat. He wasn't angry at his mother. He could never be angry at her. She had done what she thought was best. But that didn't stop the flood of emotions threatening to break through. "Do you know what happened to him?" Keanu asked, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Lena shook her head. "No. After that night, I never saw him again. Your mom never talked about him. But when I saw you today, something just told me I had to say something." Keanu exhaled slowly. For more than 30 years, he had kept his father in the past. He had moved forward, built a life, created his own identity. But now, the past had found him anyway. And for the first time in a long time, Keanu wasn't sure if he should keep walking away, or turn around and finally face it. Keanu sat on his motorcycle, gripping the handlebars, his mind a storm of memories and questions. Lena had already left, but her words lingered, heavy in the air. "I know I messed up. But I think about him every day." Had his father really meant it? Or was it just something people said when it was too late to fix what was broken? For most of his life, Keanu had been at peace with the past. He had learned to let go, to move forward. His mother had been his rock, his guiding light. He didn't need to dig up old wounds. And yet, as he stared at the busy street ahead of him, he felt something new. Curiosity. Maybe it was time to know the truth. That night, Keanu sat at his kitchen table, an old leather notebook open in front of him. It was one of the few things he had kept from his younger years, filled with thoughts, sketches, and random notes from his teenage days. He flipped through the pages until he found it. A name. A place. Samuel Reeves, Hawaii? It was a vague memory, something his mother had mentioned in passing when he was younger. His father was originally from Hawaii. That was where he had disappeared to. Keanu pulled out his phone, hesitating for a moment before typing the name into a search engine. Thousands of results popped up, but none of them seemed useful. His father had been out of his life for so long. He wasn't some public figure, not someone easily found. But then, on the second page of results, something caught his eye. A small obituary from a few years ago. Keanu clicked on the link, his heart pounding. There it was. Samuel Nowlin Reeves Jr., 74, passed away peacefully in his home in Honolulu, Hawaii. He is survived by his family and loved ones. Keanu stared at the screen, his chest tightening. He was gone. His father, the man who had abandoned him, the man who had once asked to see him, was gone. Keanu let out a slow breath, trying to process the flood of emotions washing over him. He wasn't sure what he had expected. A chance to ask him why? A confrontation? Closure? Now, all he had were more unanswered questions. But as he scrolled further down, something else caught his eye. A name in the survivors list. Survived by his daughter, Emily Reeves. Keanu's brows furrowed. A daughter? His father had another child? Keanu leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He had a half-sister. And he had never known. For a long time, he sat in silence, staring at the name on the screen. Finally, he exhaled and reached for his phone. There was one more search he needed to make. Because maybe, just maybe, the past wasn't finished with him yet. Keanu hesitated before pressing the search button. His heart pounded in a way that felt strange, unexpected. He had spent years not thinking about his father, not wondering if he had a family beyond the one he had built for himself. But now, staring at the name Emily Reeves, he felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. What if she had answers? What if she had stories about their father, things Keanu had never known? What if she had wondered about him, the same way he now wondered about her? He took a breath and typed, Emily Reeves, Honolulu. A few results popped up. A LinkedIn profile. A Facebook page. And then, a small website for a bookstore. Emily Reeves, owner, Pacific Pages, Honolulu, Hawaii. A bookstore. Keanu smiled slightly. It felt fitting. He had always loved books, always found solace in stories. Maybe, just maybe, this was a sign. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He could send an email, call the store. But no, this was something he needed to do in person. He pulled out his phone and booked a flight. 2 days later, Keanu stepped off a plane onto the warm soil of Honolulu. The salty breeze filled his lungs, bringing back distant childhood memories, things he hadn't thought about in years. The bookstore was small, tucked between a cafe and a surf shop. The sign above the door read Pacific Pages in soft blue lettering. Through the window, he could see shelves lined with books, a cozy reading nook in the corner, and a woman behind the counter flipping through a novel. Emily. Keanu took a breath and pushed the door open. A small bell chimed as he stepped inside. The woman behind the counter, mid-30s, dark hair, kind eyes, looked up. "Hi, welcome to Pacific Pages," she said with a warm smile. Keanu stepped forward. "Emily Reeves?" She nodded. "That's me." He swallowed, suddenly unsure how to say the words that had brought him here. "My name is Keanu," he said finally. "Keanu Reeves." Emily's smile faded slightly, her brows knitting together in confusion. Then, realization dawned in her eyes. Her mouth parted slightly, as if she was trying to form a sentence but couldn't find the words. "You're..." She started then stopped. Keanu nodded. "I think we're family." For a long moment, Emily just stared at him. Then, slowly, she set her book down and took a step forward. "I never thought I'd meet you," she whispered. Keanu let out a small chuckle. "Yeah," he admitted. "Me either." Emily hesitated, then smiled. Do you want to grab a coffee?" Keanu smiled back. "I'd love to." They sat at a small table outside a beachside cafe, the ocean stretching endlessly before them. At first, the conversation was careful, full of hesitations and half-formed questions. But soon, it became easy. Natural. Emily told him about their father, how he had struggled with his demons, how he had tried, in his own flawed way, to be better. "He talked about you sometimes," she admitted. He regretted leaving. But he didn't know how to fix it. Keanu listened, his heart heavy but open. It didn't erase the past, didn't undo the hurt. But it gave him something he never thought he'd have. Understanding. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set, Keanu realized something. He hadn't just found answers. He had found a sister. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like a missing piece of his life had finally fallen into place.